The weed of crime bears bitter fruit.
You cannot see me. I am here in the room, in the shadow.
As you sow evil, so shall you reap evil. I've come for you. Surely you're not afraid of death. You cannot lie to me. I know. I am here, close to you, watching you. I am the Shadow.
Oh no! What evil lurks the hearts of men? The Shadow knows.
Comic book fans, pulp fans, shadow fans, you'd better grab something. Hold on and hold on tight, because I guarantee you, you've never seen anything like this. Here we go.
Extra, extra! Read all about it. Crime runs wild in streets. Economy plunges into chaos. Extra, extra! Read all about it.
The Shadow's story begins back in the days of the mob, as the light-hearted prohibition-fueled roaring 20s gave way to the darkness of the Great Depression. Crime was running wild in the streets. The economy was plunging into chaos, and there seemed to be no escape, except in the pulps. Tech Story magazines with sleek poster-styled covers displaying fantastic scenes of adventure, sex, and violence. Full of radiant women and bright young men who had turned to the dark side. Murder. Doom. Death. Screeching skulls and giant germs. Thrilling love. True detectives. The term pulp comes from the cheap paper these stories were printed on, called wood pulp, but it also recalls the phrase beaten to a pulp, making it an appropriate nickname for dime novels depicting thrilling adventures, titillating love stories, and hard-boiled crime fiction. One pulp publisher, Street and Smith, located in Manhattan, hit upon a unique cross-promotional gimmick. They would increase sales of their detective story magazine by sponsoring a weekly radio program dramatizing its stories. Scriptwriter Harry Charlot suggested the host of Detective Story Magazine Hour be a sinister-sounding hooded character whom Charlot named the Shadow. As original Shadow radio announcer Ken Roberts recalls,
when I came onto the show, The Shadow was a series of dramatic crime programs solved by different detectives every week. The role of the Shadow on that program was to introduce it and to act as something of a narrator.
Broadway actor James Licurto was chosen to play the Shadow, and when Detective Story Magazine Hour premiered on July 31, 1930, listeners heard Licurto speak a familiar phrase for the first time.
The Shadow knows.
Licurto voiced the Shadow for just a handful of episodes. Then he returned to Broadway. He was replaced by an actor named Frank Reddick.
Today, the usurers are the gods of the earth, and the only mortal sin is to be poor.
Indeed, And as Frank Reddick's sinister voice went crackling across the airwaves, audiences across America were transported into the Shadow's fiendishly inviting world of brutal crime and swift justice.
Does crime ever pay? This is the Shadow. Money. Thousands of dollars in vaults. A woman greedy for love, for gold. Watch carefully while this story comes to life.
And once he had done his opening line, he was practically finished on the program until the very end of the show when he came back with
The weed of crime bears bitter fruit. Crime does not pay. The Shadow knows.
The program had been created to promote Detective Story magazine. But after listeners heard Frank Reddick's mesmerizing performance as The Shadow, they rushed to newsstands to buy The Shadow magazine. Unfortunately, no such magazine existed. But it was potentially much worse than that, Shadow fans. What if one of Street and Smith's competitors started publishing a magazine called The Shadow? They could steal the character right out from under them. The thought was too horrible to contemplate. There was no time to waste. Street and Smith decided that as quickly as possible they were going to be the first to create a pulp magazine titled The Shadow. About this time, former magician, journalist, and pulp editor Walter Gibson contacted Street and Smith editor Frank Blackwell in hopes of getting some work. Gibson ended up adopting The Shadow.
Like the wallpaper sticks to the wall, and like the seashore clings to the sea, like you'll never get rid of your shadow, you'll never get rid of me.
I've been a newspaper writer. I've written many articles on mysteries, ancient and modern, psychic subjects, and so forth. I worked for Houdini. I was writing books for him when he died. So when this came along, I had done some fiction, and mostly of the type that was supposed to be true, the confession type of stuff. I was an editor up at McFadden's. I edited True Strange Stories. That was why Blackwell wanted me to write The Shadow, because he knew that I'd edited a weird magazine and that I was also a newspaper writer and could write fast, and he said, go ahead and write something in this vein.
Walter Brown Gibson was born in Germantown, Pennsylvania, here in his family home on September 12, 1897. His father owned a successful gas supply company. Gibson served in the Army during World War I, and after the war, he spent years turning out thousands of crossword puzzles and truckloads of articles on magic tricks, fake spirit mediums, and crooked carnival games. Walter Gibson had been married twice when he met his third wife, Pearl, to whom he was married for 36 years. They were a magical couple, literally. Like Walter, she was born in Pennsylvania, and she was also a professional magician and an author. Pearl liked the name Perlitska so much that she went by the name Litska. Here she is, practicing a card trick with Walter and their beloved pet rooster, China Boy. And here's Gibson with his son Robert and grandson Robert Jr. Gibson was the biographer and ghostwriter for well-known magician Howard Thurston, and also for Chicago native Harry Blackstone, the world's master magician, and also for the man who nothing on earth could hold, the world's greatest escape artist, the legendary Harry Houdini. Walter Gibson passed away in 1985. During his lifetime, the wildly productive author wrote more than 100 books on magic, prestidigitation, magicians, poker, card tricks and games, knots, and psychic sciences of all kinds. According to Gibson, every magic trick consists of two components, the effect, what the trick looks like to the audience, and the method, the means used to do the trick. The magician uses the effect to distract the audience from the method. This is called misdirection. There are two special rules in magic. Be careful not to tell the audience exactly what you intend to do, and never repeat a trick. In what was perhaps the greatest effect of his career, Walter Gibson fused the principles of magic with the skills of a newspaperman to write an incredible 282 shadow novels for Street and Smith. But astonishingly, not one of these stories' covers carried the magician journalist's own byline. Even though the Shadow and Gibson both attended the same magician's convention in an issue of the Pulp. Street and Smith didn't want any superstar writers demanding higher wages, so they forced many of their authors to write under assumed names that could easily be assumed by another writer at management's whim. At least Gibson got to make up his own pen name. He invented the alias Maxwell Grant by combining the names of two magician friends, Maxwell Holden and U.P. Grant. Gibson's autograph intertwines his own name with the famous pen name he created in 1930, Maxwell Grant.
"No, is it really you?" said the learned man. "Well, this is most remarkable. I never supposed it possible that a man's shadow could become a human being. Tell me everything that you saw." "Everything," said the shadow, "for I saw and know everything."
Gibson didn't invent the name The Shadow. In fact, other shadows had been caught in the spotlight long before the Street and Smith production took to the stage. Half a decade before The Shadow, French cabaret singer and comedian Aristide Bruant was famous for wearing a black cape and long red scarf every evening at his nightclub, Le Mirliton. In 1885, a series of posters by Toulouse-Lautrec immortalized Bruant in his familiar black and scarlet uniform. The first masked avenger to have a secret identity was also French, the Scarlet Pimpernel, created by Baroness Orczy. The Scarlet Pimpernel was the head of a secret society that rescued French citizens during the Reign of Terror. The Shadow was also influenced by Arsène Lupin, a gentleman thief specializing in intricate schemes and impenetrable disguises. The character, created by Maurice Leblanc, was one of Walter Gibson's favorites. Next came All-American Nick Carter, a wealthy private detective and expert makeup artist who was known for carrying a gun in each hand. Carter and his aides battled criminal masterminds starting in 1886. Then there was Master Detective Sherlock Holmes, the hawk-nosed sleuth created by Scottish author Sir Arthur Conan Doyle in 1887. Did original Holmes illustrator Sidney Paget use his brother Walter Paget, seen here, as a model for his Holmes illustrations, such as this one? Elementary, my dear viewer. There's not a shadow of a doubt. Jimmy Dale, alias the Gray Seal, was created by Frank Packard in 1914. Dale was a wealthy playboy by day, but at night he put on a mask and became the Gray Seal. Then, in 1919, came Johnson McCulley's Zorro, the swashbuckling masked Latino swordsman in black, who was first introduced in All Story Weekly's The Curse of Capistrano. The name Zorro means fox in Spanish. In 1922, Street and Smith's Western Story magazine ran a serialized novel called The Shadow of Silver Tip, about an unknown outlaw whom residents of Silver Tip and surrounding territories have named the Shadow. In 1925, the Phantom of the Opera, played by Lon Chaney Sr., transported moviegoers to a mysterious secret sanctum and shocked them senseless when the black-cloaked, masked phantom's horribly disfigured face was finally revealed. In 1927, Bela Lugosi debuted on Broadway in the role that made him famous.
I am Dracula.
Walter Gibson once said his conception of the shadow was strongly influenced by Bram Stoker's Dracula, a frightening creature of the night with a black cloak and dark hypnotic powers.
Yes, Master.
Give me some Dracula.
In 1929, the Saturday Evening Post ran a series of short stories by famed jazz-age writer F. Scott Fitzgerald, featuring a character in a play who was, as Fitzgerald wrote, a gentleman burglar called The Shadow. Only it turns out in the end that he's really a young man about town doing it on a bet. Also in 1929, Street and Smith's Fame and Fortune pulp featured a mysterious hooded specter haunting Manhattan's financial district with his mocking laughter. His name was Compton Moore, but he was known as the Shadow of Wall Street. Finally, in 1930, the radio Shadow began broadcasting, leading to the creation of the Shadow pulp and the hiring of Walter Gibson to write it. This, then, was Gibson's daunting mission. Take a dark, mysterious shadow with a sinister voice, weird, haunting laugh, and narrator's omniscient knowledge of the story he is telling, and make it live. The sinister voice, weird laugh, and uncanny knowledge of other people's affairs were all wonderful. But Walter Gibson was quite a remarkable man himself, and the shadow he cast was to be far more than just an expert busybody with a peculiar sense of humor. Gibson saw the shadow as the ultimate magician, detective, crime buster, similar to others who had preceded him, but with a difference that made him utterly unique. Remember Gibson's rule about never repeating the same trick twice? He followed that rule in creating the shadow, for the shadow was to be a hero like no other. Because his true ancestors weren't heroes, they were villains. Gibson had long hated the way fictional villains get away with all sorts of wild stuff, but heroes usually behave like dullards, until just at the end of the story, when they suddenly find the brains and personality to bring everything to a lovely conclusion. Like many people, Gibson found villains far more interesting than heroes, and wished heroes had a bit of the villain's appeal.
You know something? I could like you if it weren't for your sense of justice and fair play. Why don't you rotten up like me?
Oh, I could never do that.
But Gibson could. He decided to dress his hero in villain's clothing. Gibson's shadow would be a sinister cloaked figure who materialized from out of the night, not to tie fair maidens to railroad tracks, but to untie them, destroy criminals, and generally strike terror into the hearts of evildoers. In an era of rampant lawlessness and imminent war, the Shadow's main mission would be to stamp out organized crime and smash spy rings. But he would occasionally take the time to find a missing heir, oust a dictator from a mythical republic, uncover a buried treasure, or banish a contrived ghost from a phony haunted house. For in the Shadow's well-ordered, completely rational world, there was no such thing as a real haunted house. What did the Shadow actually look like? Before the first issue of the pulp magazine was published, Street and Smith held a big contest offering $1,000 in prizes to the readers who best assembled a series of clues and solved the mystery of the Shadow's appearance. Everyone who entered was sent this autographed postcard. Gibson's working title for his first Shadow story was Murder in the Next Room. When he submitted the first 6 chapters in January 1931, to his surprise, he discovered that with no time or budget to commission a new cover painting, Street and Smith were cannibalizing an old painting that had previously been used on an issue of Thrill Book. It showed a Chinese man cowering in fear of a glowing cross. The cross was deleted. The background was cut out to create a silhouette. The only problem was that there were no Chinese men in Gibson's story. He quickly relocated the scene to Manhattan's Chinatown, completed the remaining chapters, and the finished pulp was rushed to America's crowded newsstands. Don't miss our next thrilling chapter, The Living Shadow.
The shadow knows.
This is to certify that I have made careful examination of the manuscript known as The Living Shadow, as set down by Mr. Maxwell Grant, my raconteur, and do find it a true account of my activities. Signed, The Shadow.
The fog was thick at the center of the bridge, where Harry Vincent stood leaning against the rail. Mist, thick black mist, nothing but mist. It seemed to invite his plunge, yet he hesitated, as many wait when they are on the brink of death, until, with a mad impulse, he swung his body across the rail and loosened his hands. Something clamped upon his shoulder. An iron grip held him balanced between life and death. Then, as though his body possessed no weight whatsoever, the man felt himself pulled around in a sweeping circle. He staggered and struck the sidewalk of the bridge. He turned to confront the person who had interfered. He faced a tall, black-cloaked figure that might have represented death itself, for he could not have sworn that he was looking at a human being. The stranger's face was entirely obscured by a broad-brimmed felt hat bent downward over his features, and the long black coat looked almost like part of the thickening fog. Fear clutched the heart of the man who had been saved against his will. A voice spoke through the darkness. It was a weird, chilling voice, scarcely more than a whisper, yet clear and penetrating.
This is my promise. Life, with enjoyment, with danger, with excitement, and with money. Life above all, with honor. But if I give it, I demand obedience. Absolute obedience.
At the close of The Living Shadow, we hear conjecture that the Shadow may have been an aviator in the First World War, or a spy, or both. And most disturbing of all, a gangster nicknamed Spotter tells his underworld friends,
I seen the Shadow. I looked for his face. I saw nothing but a piece of white that looked like a bandage. Maybe the Shadow ain't got no face to speak of. Looked like the bandage hid something in the back. There was a young guy once who the crooks was afraid of. He was a famous spy in the war, and they say he was wounded over in France. Wounded in the face. I think the Shadow's this guy come back.
The Shadow pulp had been created to secure a trademark. No one had particularly high hopes for the magazine. Street and Smith published lots of pulps, and many never lasted beyond the first few issues. Only a precious few struck gold and became fixtures in American life. But to Street and Smith's surprise, the first issue of The Shadow, a detective magazine, dated April 1, 1931, was one of them. The entire print run sold out. It was doubled for the second issue. That sold out too. And so did succeeding issues. The Shadow had captured the public imagination. The object of fascination and obsession, he was now on his way to becoming the most popular character in two separate mediums, the radio drama and the pulp magazine, at the height of their glory days. The Shadow is the only fictional character ever created who can make that claim. It happened because Gibson had created an uncompromising avenger of evil just when the public was perfectly in the mood to embrace an uncompromising avenger of evil. The shadow was created only a few years after Sigmund Freud first theorized that the personality is composed of three parts: the ego, which is the conscious self, the superego, which is the parental voice of conscience, and id, the dark primal emotions. To a large extent, the shadow is a personification of the id, and his adventures play out like national psychodramas told in the form of cliffhanger serials in prose. In a time when evil seemed to swallow wine and rejoice in high places, the shadow brought justice to those who seemed insulated from justice. Cold, remote, perceptive. He was part abstract force and part myth. Yet for all his clandestine contrivances and bizarre machinations, he was an unseen force sustaining the public good, and the public appetite for him was insatiable.
Do another 4, they said, and then they said do it monthly. Next thing they wanted them twice a month. Well, this was the Depression, and that was a good thing to be doing. I just dropped everything else and did the shadow for 15 years. I was sort of depression-proof.
Gibson was paid $400 for The Living Shadow. He would eventually make more than $700 for each novel. During the dark days of the Great Depression, this was considered a very healthy income indeed. If he wanted to, Gibson could buy a brand new car every month and pay for it in cash with wages from his shadow writing. He rented a huge luxury apartment near Manhattan's Central Park and took to living like a prince.
Life is gonna be a wee wow wee for my shadow and me.
Shadow fans, the entire documentary you're watching right now is only about 15,000 words. Gibson wrote 1,440,000 words in less than 10 months. And that record was just the beginning, because he wrote the series for 15 consecutive years. How? How in the world did he do it? Walter Gibson once wrote in his diary, "A strange feeling grips me as I write. I do not feel tired. I seem filled with a strong vigor. The past seems vague and far away, while the future spreads before me full of mystery." As time passed, Gibson was living, thinking, even dreaming his shadow stories in one continuous process. Ideas came to him faster and faster. Sometimes the ideas would fly so fast, he wondered if his fingers could keep up with them. He used to knock out a shadow novel a week, then take a few days off because his fingertips were too sore to begin work on the next book. Instead, he'd spend 2 or 3 days on plots and outlines. He was living the thing all the time, and one story just merged with the next.
I would knock off 30 to 40 pages a day. The pages were 250 words, and there were 200 pages to a story. That meant in 5 days, if I did 40 pages a day, I'd had my writing done.
Gloria was quite oblivious to the weave of more distant shapes. Almost a half block behind her, a gliding shadow was keeping constant pace, as though it were Gloria's own. Singularly, it seemed to seek other shadows as though magnetized by them. Once blended with the darkness, it disappeared. But later it would unexpectedly emerge from the blackness in a most unlikely quarter. Only once did the shadow reveal itself as possessing substance. That was when Gloria turned a corner and could not have looked back to see the sudden change. Gathering itself like ink drawn by a blotter, that shape became a silhouetted figure that took a quick shortcut to the corner. Despite the clammy dampness of the fog, there was the slight sweep of a cloak that trailed from hidden shoulders, a momentary glint from keen, burning eyes beneath the obscuring brim of a black slouch hat. The shadow, master stalker of the night, had, for some reason known only to himself, picked up the trail of Gloria Brent, the girl who was seeking the mysterious Jade Dragon. Coming up next, the Shadow's secret sanctum.
I alone know, for I am the Shadow.
Let's explore some of the Night Master's secrets, paraphrasing Robert Sampson. Central to every Shadow story is the Shadow's role as a master manipulator who secretly controls the actions of his agents, suspects, criminals, and even the law. The Shadow is nearly psychic in his ability to pluck truth from the tangled web of deceit. He has an uncanny ability to draw forth facts from practically no evidence at all. How does he do it? The Shadow knows. Criminals hatch fantastic schemes, and he is there listening. Or he is outside, clinging to the wall like a huge bat. Or perched upon the ledge like a circus acrobat, costumed all in black. Or he stands in a shadow-filled corner between the bookcase and the wall. Or he is there, among the participants, his face perfectly disguised to look like one of them. The Shadow knows. His listening devices probe mansions of evil. No space is closed to him. He slides up sashes and enters locked homes at will. No secret can be withheld from him. No door or window can restrain him. His agents are part of clandestine discussions, remembering every word spoken. Or, if they are absent, he simply deduces what went on. For his icy mind, unencumbered by error and emotion, is utterly incapable of bafflement. He is the Shadow, and ladies and gentlemen, let me assure you, he knows.
You can hide down in the alley with your head pulled over your eye. You can wear a wig or mustache or any old disguise. Well, you can change your name and your address, even change your style of clothes. But the Shadow knows. The Shadow knows. You thought you had me baffled. You thought I didn't know. But I know where you going, baby. Long before you go. You can't even snap your fingers or wiggle your toes without the Shadow knows. The Shadow knows.
The Shadow knows.
The Shadow knows.
Shadow knows. The Shadow knows.
Yeah, so baby, stop your jiving and your messing around. 'Cause I know what you're putting, baby, long before you put it down. You better mind your P's and Q's and your M's and N's and O's, because
The Shadow knows.
The Shadow Knows. The title of this documentary. Do you like it so far? You ain't seen nothing yet, because we're about to penetrate deeper into the Shadow's secret world than anyone ever has before. Here we go. The Shadow Knows. But what do we know about the Shadow? In the beginning, not very much. And that's the whole appeal. His voice is a whisper, a terrible hiss. His laugh, a sinister inheritance from the radio Shadow, strikes terror into the hearts of both the underworld and police alike. His secret identity, apparently, is wealthy young man about town, Lamont Cranston. He heads a network of agents who report to him using coded letters which are hand-delivered to the B. Jonas office, then routed to the Shadow's secret sanctum. Then, alone in his sanctum, at a desk illuminated only by a blue light hanging overhead, the Shadow employs arcane solutions to decipher each report, as though solving a larcenous sliding puzzle. Beneath the brim of his slouch hat, his eyes blaze like twin fire points as he rearranges names and sentences, imposing order on chaos, transforming speculation into fact. Emotions play no role in his deductions. Under his blue light, the most lurid and violent crimes imaginable play out with journalistic detachment as the Shadow cuts and pastes his agents' reports, filling in the blanks like an omniscient newspaper editor. His mind is as clear as a diamond from space, and as icy. As they move under the blue light, we see that his hands are white, his fingers long. They behave like eerie creatures with a life all their own. One finger is encircled by a highly significant ring whose stone is a fire opal, or gyrosol. Flames of red, orange, yellow, purple, and even black seem to dance within this stone worn on the ring finger of the Shadow's left hand. This mysterious fire opal, taken from a tribal idol in the Yucatan jungle, is an indispensable part of Shadow lore and legend. In addition to his famous gyrosol ring, the Shadow also carries a lockpick, a small vial of wonderfully reviving medicine, a tiny flashlight that can blink in various colors, and a nesting cluster of suction cups for wall scaling. Like his creator, the Shadow was an expert magician, and Gibson incorporated many stage magic tricks into the series. Sewn into the hem of the Shadow's cloak is a vial containing two separate powders. One powder is dusted lightly on the thumb, another on the forefinger. A snap of the fingers produces a loud, brilliant explosion. There were also stories dealing with such magical illusions as firewalking, the hand unaffected by boiling water, the vanish in smoke and flame, and the disappearance with mirrors. As the series progresses, locations change, new settings are introduced, and a distinctive shadow falls all over the world. San Francisco, Moscow, Philadelphia. The repeated trips to Maine seem odd, until we realize that the Shadow helped build this, Gibson's vacation home, in Maine. The Shadow also visits Germany and Atlantic City and Cuba. And in every locale, he speaks the language like a native. His Russian is impeccable. When the Shadow visits the City of Light, he speaks French as though he was born in Paris. He solves the ancient riddle of the Sphinx in fluent Egyptian. He seems to know every language. He even speaks Chinese.
You speak Chinese?
Only Mandarin.
And just as the Shadow was comfortable working in any country, Walter Gibson was comfortable writing in any genre. From old-school drawing room murder mysteries to hard-boiled crime adventures to science fiction, the ink flowed from Gibson's typewriter in a never-ending torrent. And as it did, the dark silhouette of one of fiction's greatest crime fighters began to take shape. What did that shape look like? Don't miss our next exciting chapter, The Captured Shadow.
The shadow knows.
Friends, remember that you can continue to thrill to the adventures of the Shadow by getting the Shadow magazine at your local newsstand.
Street and Smith published 325 issues of The Shadow, plus 3 annuals, a stack of publications approximately 10.5 feet high, for 18 consecutive years starting October 1, 1932. Anytime anyone wanted to escape from the drudgeries of real life into a fantastical world of magic and mystery, they could always buy an issue of that grand American institution, The Shadow magazine. The Shadow hadn't appeared on his own first cover. That issue's table of contents page showed a shadow illustration based on Street and Smith's editor-in-chief, Frank Blackwell. The next issue's cover didn't show the Shadow either. His appearance gradually began to take shape over the course of the next 4 issues, on covers painted by Jerome Rosen. On all 4, the Shadow was pictured in the lower right-hand corner as a Shadow of Wall Street-like figure in a green hood, and shown in silhouette on the cover's main scene. Jerome Rosen had a twin brother, George, who was also a painter. Both were artistic from an early age, but it was George Rosen who created the definitive Shadow by painting the Master of Darkness in a swirling black cloak and giving him a hawk-like profile. But when George Rosen was first asked to give the Shadow a hawk-like profile, he had no idea what that meant. He was referred to the ample nose of Bill Lawler, an assistant art director at Street and Smith. Rosen scoured second-hand stores looking for the perfect headgear for the Shadow, and finally found this old-fashioned slouch hat. Rosen used it on models for years. Today, the world-famous slouch hat belongs to Shadow historian Anthony Tollin. Tollin rescued it from the obscurity of the Rosen family attic. Rosen also used a dress cape that belonged to his wife as a model for the Shadow's cloak. Issue number 8 was the first cover to feature the Shadow all decked out in a slouch hat and a black cloak with blood-red lining. Rosen's concession to Smith and Street's art directors, who knew covers bathed in crimson, had a way of getting noticed on crowded, madly competitive newsstands. Newsstand owners returned unsold magazines by sending the publishers just the magazine's cover to avoid expensive mailing costs. When Street and Smith experienced problems with unscrupulous retailers ripping covers off their pulps so that they could sell the remaining coverless story at half price, the ever-inventive Walter Gibson came up with a clever solution. He tacked a short prologue onto Hands in the Dark, complete with coded street map, and had it printed right on the issue's cover. Now, shady retailers couldn't rip the cover off the issue without also discarding the beginning of the story. One year, Street and Smith wanted a Christmas cover for an issue scheduled to go on sale during the holiday season. Gibson convinced them that a dramatic scene from the issue's story, The Creeping Death, would be better. Gibson was right. The issue sold out, and George Rosen's startling living skeleton cover has since become a classic. Speaking of holidays, anyone know if the groundhog saw his shadow this year? Here's Rosen's ingenious image for the third skull, which positioned 2 human figures to form a human skull, and the cover of The Chinese Discs, which contains a secret message revealing when the issue's criminals were planning to strike. Can you decode the secret message? Look closely. Do you see it? No? Of course, it's so obvious. The answer is, the criminals plan to strike tonight. Finally, it was George Rosen who painted this, the most iconic shadow image ever created, to illustrate Walter Gibson's The Black Hush.
These crooks had devised a huge searchlight. It shot blackness instead of light. They had a place out in the country. All you had to do was fly over it with a plane. And bang, they just turned on the black hush, and they killed all the electric work in the plane, and you were done. Well, the Shadow flew over in his autogyro. Well, now you know the autogyros, the way they work. That big windmill on top, it was like a parachute. So the Shadow simply flew around until he knew he'd got the place, because all of a sudden, bang, and all his electricity is cut out, and he says, this is what I wanted, and he lands right on their damn place because he just coasted down into it. And that was when he came and finished him.
Graves Gladney began doing shadow covers in 1939 and continued for 2 years. Gladney himself sometimes modeled for other pulps. Here he is on the cover of Astounding Science Fiction. Gladney felt most pulp covers had no atmosphere and no reality to them at all. So Gladney changed the Shadow's appearance slightly, patterning the new look after his own face. He also attempted to make the Shadow's image more realistic by shortening his cloak and downplaying its blood-red lining. The artist frequently tried to get away with omitting the red lining altogether, but he was usually caught and had to touch up his paintings. Gladney eventually inherited a fortune and left the pulps to go hunting in Africa. He died of a heart attack in 1976. Gladney thought the best cover painting he ever did for the Shadow pulp was The Crimson Death. What's your favorite Shadow pulp cover? Get the pause button ready. Here's all 328 of them. Don't blink. And the covers were just the beginning, of course. Underneath their eye-catching painted covers, pulps were mainly text, with just a few black and white drawings depicting the most thrilling or dramatic moments in the stories. Most pulps began with one or more pages of advertisements. Then, after that, came a table of contents page and more ads. Then an illustrated spread with the story's title and author's byline. After that, it was mostly words, 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 with just a few drawings. Yes, people actually read back then. With no internet, no VCRs, no DVDs, no cable TV, and no television at all, they didn't have much choice. The first artist to do interiors for the Shadow pulps was Tom Lavelle, who got just $12 for each drawing. Lavelle's Shadow came closest to Gibson's own mental picture of the Shadow, because Lavelle pictured the character as a judge-like figure of vengeance dressed in an all-black robe. Lavelle left the Shadow after 4 years to become a sergeant in the U.S. Marine Corps. And he later became famous for his highly detailed photorealistic paintings of the American West, the Civil War, and historic battle scenes. Here's his version of the pivotal Battle of Hastings, from sketch to color rough to beautiful finished painting. Tom Lavelle shared a studio with Saturday Evening Post artist Edward Daniel Cartier, who signed his work Ed Cartier. Cartier had done numerous illustrations for other Street and Smith pulps, and he took over the Shadow interiors in 1936. Cartier, born in North Bergen, New Jersey, did more than 800 interior Shadow illustrations, and his work was cited by Shadow comic book artist Mike Kaluta as his greatest influence. And don't worry, we'll get to the Shadow comic books. We're just getting started, Shadow fans. After Ed Cartier was drafted into World War II, Earl Mahan took over the Shadow. Mahan used to photograph himself in the slouch hat and cloak for references to draw his version of the character. Mahan said the most important thing at all times was action. With title page illustrations especially, he favored action, mood, or horror, anything to stir the reader. Shadow interiors were also done by Paul Orban, Bob Powell, and Raymond Kinsler. Presto changeo, ladies and gentlemen, before your very eyes. The Shadow, also known as Lamont Cranston, has evolved from a little scene manipulator into a full-fledged crime fighter with a network of agents, then plunged confidently into that most difficult of professions, pulp magazine hero.
After the Shadow began to go, all the other competition magazines simply said, oh, write something, let's get up a name, something like the Shadow, let's get in there all doing that. And just as they had thrilling love story, popular love story, dime love story, everything of that sort, so you naturally expected them to write the same type of stuff. The Phantom was the first, then came the Spider, then came things like Operator 5, Secret Agent X, Dr. Wu Fan.
But Gibson's Master of Darkness beat the competition as easily as he dispensed with criminals. The Shadow had conquered the pulps, and now he was ready to make a triumphant return to the medium in which he had been born. Find out how in our next hypnotic chapter, The Invisible Shadow.
The Shadow knows.
Extra, extra, read all about it. Next week, same time, same station. The Shadow's latest adventure. Extra, extra, read all about it.
Street and Smith launched a totally new Shadow radio program in 1937, one where the Shadow wasn't the narrator, but the invisible star.
Wait a minute, I got it. I figured out my revelation. The Shadow is in reality Lamont Cranston, wealthy young man about town.
Who knows what evil lurks in the hearts of men? The Shadow knows.
In the pulps, the Shadow didn't have the power of invisibility. Gibson described him as a shadowy creature of the night with the ability to blend into shadows, but not actually become one. Passages in The Star of Delhi and the Banshee murders explain how the Shadow's power of concealment works. Using the system of remaining absolutely immobile, with even his thoughts fixed, the Shadow was practicing the ways of the Tibetan mystics. It was their belief that such concentration could produce the equivalent of invisibility. It produced the semblance of a power through which he could cloud men's minds. But the Shadow's usual way was to simply blend with the darkness. That was in the pulps. On the new radio program, Lamont Cranston's power to cloud men's minds would mean the ability to render himself as invisible as the airwaves.
The Shadow, mysterious character who aids the forces of law and order, is in reality Lamont Cranston, wealthy young man about town. Several years ago in the Orient, Cranston learned a strange and mysterious secret. The secret of hypnotic power to cloud men's minds so that they cannot see him.
Announcer Ken Roberts recalls the program's early days.
To play the part of Lamont Cranston, the whole of radio was scoured, I suppose you might say, to find an actor who would be perfect in the part. And of course they found the actor who was perfect in the part because they went to Orson Welles.
What's that? Sounded like an explosion down near the water.
Yes, it was an explosion, gentlemen. It was the tube of nitroglycerin placed in the gears of the good doctor's own feet. Compliments of the Shadow.
Soon the whole country was talking about Orson Welles' memorable portrayal of the Shadow and his radio alter ego, Lamont Cranston.
People keep talking about it. I hear on television, people keep talking, making jokes about Lamont Cranston.
When I used to listen, on the radio, when you were the Shadow, this was one of the most exciting for, especially for, when you would, when you would say, first of all, that sinister, that ha ha, and when you would say, what what evil. It was the kind of thing it would convey to especially to an impression, to a child. I was talking when I was back. I said, if only the thing that I would if I could only make magical things. What I would like you to do, what I have dreamed. If you could cloud, do what when you used to cloud, you would cloud people, you would turn people's, you would cloud people's, you could cloud people's. Mr. Wells? Oh, this is fantastic. I knew this was so mad. He has actually beclouded, Mr. Orson. He has actually beclouded my mind. Oh! Oh, Mr. Wells.
Wells was only 22 years old and thin when he gave voice to the Shadow. But still, his contract stipulated that he didn't have to show up for rehearsals. And since he never read the scripts beforehand, the ending of each radio drama came as a complete surprise to him as well as the audience.
My God, I didn't even know how they came out. I didn't rehearse them,
Who knows what evil lurks in the hearts of man? The Shadow do.
Orson was ready to go on to bigger things. He was ready to go on from the theater to Hollywood for the production of Citizen Kane.
I have something more than a hope.
And so we no longer would have Orson, and we were sure the show would go off the air. But wonder of wonders, it did not. The program was strong enough to continue with other people in the role. One of the first of them was Bill Johnstone.
Surely your scientific studies have made you aware of the powers of hypnosis, whereby a man might render himself unseen. A science practiced by a man known to the criminal world as the Shadow. Shadow? Yes, Hardwick. I am the Shadow.
After Bill Johnstone came Brett Morrison, who would continue in the role for the next decade.
When I got out of the Army, I came on to New York because I was stationed in Boston, First Service Command, and I got a call for an audition. So I ran in and they just said, well, there isn't time to do anything. Just read this. It's the opening and closing signatures, and just read it. And it was the opening and closing signature of The Shadow. And a couple days later, I got a call saying, you're it.
The radio Shadow was also played for one season by John Archer, who appeared in White Heat with Jimmy Cagney.
You might as well come down, Jared. There's no one left but you.
John Archer is the father of actress Ann Archer, co-star of Fatal Attraction and Patriot Games.
You get him, Jack. I don't care what you have to do. Just get him.
Radio shadows from two different eras matched wits in The Shadow Challenged, about a villain who learns the Shadow's secrets and poses as the Man in Black. The good Shadow was played by then current Shadow Bill Johnstone, and his evil twin was played by one of the original Shadows, Frank Reddick.
Don't let me frighten you, Mr. Cranston. I'm your old friend, the Shadow.
You are not the Shadow?
No? How would you know that?
I repeat, you are not the Shadow.
I see. And would your knowledge be based on the fact that you yourself are the Shadow? Would it, Mr. Cranston? Having learned your secret of invisibility, I've hypnotized your mind before you were aware of me. This time, the real Shadow is visible, and I am the one unseen. With the trick of invisibility, the world will be mine.
I gather that I am to be the next victim in your chain of murders.
To put it bluntly, yes.
Unlike your other victims, my mind is not receptive to your hypnosis.
What are you saying?
I mean that you have been perfectly visible to me ever since you entered this room.
You see me?
Most clearly. And now, if you will observe closely, I shall instruct you in the true art of hypnosis. Look at me, Professor Carter.
No.
Look at me.
No.
I am disappearing before your very eyes. You see? You see?
Wait, you can't do this.
You're destroying my power. You hear? You're clouding my mind. Cranston. I am no longer Cranston, Professor Carter. I am
the Shadow.
In Gibson's world, misdirection was the name of the game, and nothing was ever as it appeared. For in the pulps, we learn that the Shadow is not Lamont Cranston at all. Instead, there's a man named Lamont Cranston, and the Shadow merely borrows his identity at times. At first, he did so without the real Cranston's knowledge. But when the real Cranston returns home unexpectedly after a 6-month absence, he is puzzled to hear that he has been seen in several places he has no memory of being. Then one night at 4 in the morning, in a scene that's enough to make you give up sleeping, Cranston gets a most unexpected visitor. The chapter is titled, Lamont Cranston Talks to Himself. A figure was standing at the foot of his bed, a black figure like a huge shadow. Cranston's eyes made out a form clad in black, its face hidden by a hat with turned-down brim. "Who are you?"
You ask me who I am?
Said the strange being.
Tell me first who you are.
"You know my name, Lamont Cranston." The black form moved slightly. The cloak and hat dropped backward and disappeared. A man was revealed in the light, and a startled cry escaped Lamont Cranston's lips. The person who stood before him was the very double of himself.
I am Lamont Cranston,
announced the stranger. The situation was uncanny. The man in the bed could not believe his senses. He knew that he was wide awake, yet this was the most incredible experience that the human mind could imagine.
Some people call me the Shadow. That is but one identity. I have other personalities that I assume as easily as I don my hat and cloak. One of my personalities is that of Lamont Cranston. In the past, I have used it while you were away. At present, I choose to use it now. It would be embarrassing for both of us to be here, so you must go.
So Cranston went. He later returned and became one of the Shadow's agents. The Shadow has agents? Oh, yes. You'll meet them all in our next astounding chapter, Dancing in the Dark.
The Shadow knows.
In his first story, the Shadow operated mostly behind the scenes, acting more like a supporting player than a star. His early adventures are full of vanishings, fireworks, surprises, and what Mr. Gibson called mysterioso atmosphere, with a shadow directing the action from offstage. The early adventures remind me of the old movie serial cliffhangers. Reading them is like watching a great magic show that has lots of fantastic tricks, but no star magician. Instead, the tricks are performed by the Shadow's agents. The Shadow has a network of secret agents, and he recruits each one of us personally. Here's an official portrait. We're organized like a spy ring operating on foreign soil, and we act as proxy heroes for the Shadow, while he remains at the edge of the action, pulling strings like a master puppeteer. But when we need him, he always appears in person, usually at the last possible minute to rescue us from the clutches of scheming gangsters or spring us from the tender mercies of creaking torture racks. Over the years, the Shadow saved all of us 1,000,000 times. Shh! Quiet! I snuck into the Shadow's secret center. And now I'm going to open his classified files. Oh, if he catches me, oh my God. Oh, I know what this is. He likes to cut up our secret reports and repaste them together. It's very expository. That's one way he knows. Autographed photos. I never liked the shot. I think his nose looks too big. some kind of puzzle. Interesting. Okay, here we go. It's time to meet the Shadow's agents. Here's the Shadow's right-hand man, Harry Vinson. Evening Clarion and New York Classic reporter, Clyde Burke. Underworld contact, Cliff Marsland. Expert tracker, Hawkeye. And reformed safecracker Tapper.
It makes two of us. Three of us.
Doctors, I said Hawkeye and Tapper, not Trapper. Anyway. Black Giant, Jericho Druk. Cab driver, Mo Shrevnitz. Communications contact, Burbank. Detective Joe Cardona. Police Commissioner Wainwright Barth. And last but not least, the Radio Shadow's constant companion, me, the lovely Margot Lane.
Cranston's friend and companion, the lovely Margot Lane, is the only person who knows to whom the voice of the invisible shadow belongs.
I was created by Harry Charlow, the same scriptwriter who originally named The Shadow, and I first appeared in 1937 on the Shadow radio series, where I was played by Agnes Moorehead.
Here, Margot, we make this a large evening, a couple of hours at the Club Caliph. Does that intrigue you?
Lovely, but not too late. I have an appointment at 10 in the morning at the Women's Club. They're trying to get some action on this terrible narcotic situation.
Yes, I read about that.
The stuff's being peddled all over town. They found school children using it, society women. Why, it's already caused a half-dozen suicides.
Yes, I know. It's terrible stuff.
Oh, it needs the Shadow to get at the bottom of it.
Agnes appeared in more than 100 movies, including Citizen Kane with her Shadow co-star Orson Welles. But she's probably most famous for her flamboyant role as Samantha Stevens' outrageous magical mother in Dora on the Bewitched TV series.
You're not serious.
I'm totally serious. And believe it or not, Margot Lane didn't even show up in the Shadow pulps until 1941. And no explanation was given how I became involved with the Shadow until over a year later.
I don't believe it.
Well, it's true. On December 1st, 1942, readers finally learned how I originally met the real Lamont Cranston on a Caribbean cruise. Then, 2 days after we landed, I happened to run into Lamont again at a nightclub. But it was really the Shadow disguised as Lamont. And the Shadow didn't even tell me that he sometimes posed as Lamont for I don't know how long. But when he finally told me, I decided to help out. I love helping the Shadow, especially when he's fighting crimes involving high society and the nightclub scene, which is fitting because my character, Margot Lane, was based on the Broadway actress Margot Stevenson, and I was named after her too. Between the radio shows and the pulps, I've had more adventures with the Shadow than anyone. Oh, we were always getting into trouble. Or at least I was. The Shadow once said, whenever trouble is coming up, I know it from the way Margot gets into it. Oh, he should talk. Lamont is twice as bad as me. Don't even get me started on his old college buddies. Oh, what a bunch of nuts. I think he went to a university for mad scientists or something. I'm serious. For a while there, it seemed like we were running into a different college buddy of his every week, and they were all madmen. But to be honest, there were plenty of crazy women too, Shadow fans. So, let me tell you one last thing before I say goodbye. You've probably heard,
Oh no.
but evil lurks in the hearts of men a million times. Margot knows. But guess what else the Shadow knows?
My name is Margot Lane.
This is Miss Lane, and I'm Lamont Cranston.
Margot?
Shadow! Shadow!
Margot, you're flying.
Run to him. The minute I'm leaving, Shadow knows.
Don't touch that girl.
Shadow knows. But the Shadow ain't talking. The whole town is. They've seen you in the moonlight. Holding a stranger so close.
Margot, you've got to help me.
Are you lying to me, baby? Your kisses.
Lamont, please don't go. Please.
Margot?
Only the Shadow knows. Shadow knows. You and the Shadow know.
Lamont!
Get back, Margot, quickly!
Lamont, it's coming right at you!
Hey, be careful, Margot. Watch how you're driving.
You told me to step on it.
But I'd like to get there all in one piece.
This is a fine time to tell me that.
Go to him tonight. The moment I leave you, Shadow knows. Shadow knows.
Lamont, please don't go.
Will you? You lie to me again.
Lamont, look out behind you.
And won't I believe you? Shadow knows. Shadow knows.
Take your hands off that girl.
Shadow ain't talking. The whole town is. They've seen you in the moonlight, holding a stranger so close.
Shadow! Shadow!
Lying to me, baby.
Stand by, Margot.
The kisses. Only the Shadow knows. Shadow knows. You and the Shadow know. Only the Shadow knows. Shadow knows. You and the Shadow know.
Get out of the way, Margot.
Shadow!
Yes, this is the Shadow.
You and the Shadow know.
It's hard to tell whether I really know the man or only his shadow.
Don't miss our next lethal chapter, Super Criminals.
What evil lurks in the hearts of men?
The Shadow's power and mystery increased with each new adventure, and soon ordinary criminals were no longer a match for his master of darkness. So Walter Gibson invented a deadly new kind of foeman for the Shadow, the evil mastermind whose power and mystery rivaled the Shadow himself. Gibson called them super criminals. Not satisfied with mere robbery or theft, super criminals are far more ambitious. They want to cause mass panic, topple governments, and create international chaos. A few of these super criminals are so brazen and so foolish that they actually dare to go gunning for the Shadow himself. On the surface, the super criminals appear to strike for money or for power, but their real motivation lies within. In their molten heart of hearts, money and power are not enough. Only one thing will satiate them. Only heaps of corpses will ease the burning. They must have death. Their schemes require vastness. Hills and mountains are hollowed out to receive their secret empires. They plate vast caverns with steel. At the heart of the buried labyrinth, they nest luxuriously, protected by pitfalls, sliding walls, mobile floors, gas projectors, and doom rays. And there, amidst their stolen bounty, they scowl and scheme and snap forth commands to kill. Double Z features an aging maniac with toothless gums who loves death so much that the very thought of murder nearly drives him mad with glee. When I say kill, men die, he shouts, before launching into a spasm of convulsive mad laughter so fitful he can barely contain himself. And when this madman regains his composure, he cheerfully orders murder after murder after murder. Thade, the Death Giver, sees life as a tragic drama in which he loves the role of villain. From behind the skull-encrusted door of his secret lair, his hideous face shining with an eerie green glow, Thade worships death with a fervor approaching necrophilia. Death is the inevitable lot of man. With death, I have shown mercy to those who found life a burden. With death, I have ridden the world of those whose lives were useless. With death, I have gained riches. With death, I shall amass more wealth. The crime master is a vile creature with a grayish face whose thin lips spread in an evil smile to reveal discolored teeth shaped like insidious fangs. The crime master plays a deadly chess-like game with the Shadow and his agents. But we know who was really making the moves for both the Shadow and the crime master. Walter Gibson. Strumpf, a spidery little man with bony fingers and dried lips, discovers the location of the Shadow's secret sanctum in Crime Insured. Strumpf assembles all of crimedom into an underworld army, then leads them in invading the sanctum, with the Shadow trapped inside. Some supercriminals are so thoroughly evil they require multiple defeats. The Shadow fought the insidious Dr. Rodel Makino, also known as the Voodoo Master, 3 times. Makino uses dark mystical spells, black magic, and hordes of heavily armed zombies to turn the Shadow himself into a zombie. In the 1980s, Jerome Rosen painted several recreations of some of his twin brother George's best Shadow covers. Here he is with his recreations of a Doc Savage cover and his brother's cover for The Voodoo Master. Makino gave the Shadow a rough time, but the most fearsome supercriminal of them all was the Shadow's arch enemy.
Shiwan Khan, last descendant of Genghis Khan.
Shiwan Khan, patterned after Fu Manchu, mixes arcane Oriental arts with Western science in a mad quest to attain the same modest goal of every good supercriminal: world domination. Khan menaced the Shadow 4 times. In The Golden Master, Shiwan Khan returns, the invincible Shiwan Khan, and his last pulp appearance, Masters of Death. Psychotic, costumed madmen raging against the world with a white-hot fury only death can satisfy. Were they safely confined to the movie serials and pages of the pulps? Or were they terrifyingly real?
Zu wissen, dass diese Zukunft rechtlos uns gehört.
In the early days, the Shadow used only his bare fists and small, silenced pistols. But now, with a crime wave gripping the nation, mobsters openly flaunting their immunity from justice, and psychotic dictators beginning to see world domination as a viable real-life goal, the Shadow raises himself up to the full height of his power. He becomes a frightening avenger who strikes without mercy and without warning. At the mere sight of him, criminals go cold and are reduced to babbling and stumbling. He fights fire with fire, not with fanciful gas guns or merciful stun pistols, but with a pair of lethal automatic weapons. As the Shadow stepped into the corridor outside the partition room, 6 men appeared from the other end of the passage. 2 husky cutthroats were leaping forward with flashing knives. Behind them were others armed with revolvers. Against such odds, only flight seemed feasible. But had the Shadow turned his back to flee, he would have become a target for 6 deadly weapons. Instead, he did the unexpected. Barely a dozen feet lay between him and the surging crew. 2 automatics were in the Shadow's hands. The pistols roared into the teeth of the attackers. The Shadow didn't go around executing super criminals. As a rule, he just crushed their mad schemes, cornered them like trapped rats, threatened them with all manner of punishment and scandal, then let things take their natural course.
Guilty dead. Gone. Interesting, isn't it? Well, Miss Lane, I'm sorry. I can't wait any longer. I'll deal with Mr. Cranston separately. But you are going to die now.
Don't touch that control panel, Dr. Forbes.
Shadow.
Tonight, Dr. Forbes, instead of destroying the 3 strategic points in this city, the machines that would have caused this damage have been destroyed.
Shadow, I know where you are, and I'm going to shoot you.
I'm afraid you didn't know where I was, Doctor. You can never harm the Shadow by shooting at his voice. His voice can come from anywhere.
I have 1 shot left, Shadow. I saved it for myself.
The Shadow also had a nasty habit of clinging to criminals like a shadow, until...
You'll never look upon me again, Clint. I've caught up with you at last.
The Shadow took fiendish delight in issuing theatrical death threats. Cross him, and there's hell to pay.
What's wrong with the cards? They tell me nothing. No faces come up, only numbers, numbers, numbers.
Because your days are numbered, Getter.
Who's there?
This is the Shadow, Getter.
I hear a voice from nowhere.
Shadow is right here beside you.
You will be too late. The last of the Stanfields must die tonight. The cards say so.
But the Shadow says no.
If you're a criminal, meeting the Shadow in person is never the beginning of a beautiful friendship.
You're finished, Khan.
As the Shadow says in The Romanoff Jewels,
self-defense is always justifiable. I am opposed to the infliction of death and injury when it is entirely unnecessary and can be avoided.
But somehow, nearly every Shadow adventure seems to end with death being entirely necessary. The Shadow's justice may be dressed in a cloak of self-defense, but whatever rationalizations are offered, it soon becomes clear that, one way or another, if you're planning to oppose the Shadow, well, you'd better have your life insurance paid up.
I'm right here, behind you.
Who are you? What do you want?
You, Kesey. I've come for you.
Don't you touch me. Don't you come near me.
Surely you're not afraid of death.
And as the crimes grew ever bolder and more vile, so did the Shadow's deadly wrath.
You have defiled man's noblest profession. You have brought death with the skill meant to save life. You have struck like a human vampire in this great sanitarium, this sanctuary of the sick. And you are going to pay for it with death.
This is the Shadow at his most elemental. Not a man, but a dark angel of divine justice.
They call me the Shadow.
Shadow? Shadow? What Shadow? Who's talking? Where are you hiding?
I'm standing right next to you. I will you not to see me, and yet you hear me.
Who are you? Who?
To some I come as the voice of conscience. To some, like you, the voice of justice. Dr. Willard, you are guilty of the greatest crime ever perpetrated against mankind. You thought to condemn the world to an eternity of darkness and suffering.
No.
You wanted an eternal life of pleasure, of evil.
I want to die.
To satisfy your selfishness, you tried to. You did break the laws of nature. And so you must be punished, Dr. Willard.
No.
The blessed new year, that means new hope and happiness for the good and the innocent people of the world. For you, it
his hold upon the switch. A terrific flash enveloped the form of Professor Fulcroft Ehrlich. At the spot where the fiend had stood, a man remained no longer. Instead of a human form, a mass of smoldering bone and ashes were piled in a grotesque pyramid. These were all that remained of Professor Fulcroft Ehrlich, scientist and fiend of evil. Artist Jim Steranko did dozens of beautiful pulp-style paintings for the covers of his shadow paperback reprint series. Steranko, author of The Steranko History of Comics, a friend of Walter Gibson's and a huge Shadow fan, once observed that the Shadow didn't believe in the death penalty, he was the death penalty. Don't miss our next spine-tingling chapter, The Shadow Club.
I'm your old friend, the Shadow.
By 1940, the Shadow was more than just a radio voice or pulp magazine hero. He had become an American institution. The pulp magazine had a monthly circulation of 750,000 and was printed in 7 different languages. The radio program was heard on over 300 stations across the USA and also in foreign nations around the world.
Quem sabe o mal que se esconde nos corações humanos? O Sombra sabe.
The Shadow Club had well over 1 million members, but that was only counting official members. The truth was that back then, everyone belonged to the Shadow Club, and the Shadow Club was just the beginning. There were shadow coloring books, shadow matchbooks, shadow big little books, and shadow comic books, shadow blotters, belts, busts, and bagatelle games, shadow cycles, rings, and records. Getting in the holiday spirit, shadow masks and board games make it, heaven help us, a Shadow Christmas. The Shadow Club also had another important member, Hollywood. Movie stars such as Gary Cooper had appeared in ads in the Shadow Pulp magazine. Now, several would portray the Master of Darkness himself on the silver screen. In the early 1930s, Universal produced a series of shorts featuring the Shadow in the role of narrator. At least one of these 6 short films featured an unseen Frank Reddick as the voice of the Shadow.
Watch for me. You shall see me soon again.
In 1937, Grand National Pictures released The Shadow Strikes, based on Gibson's Ghost of the Manor. In this 64-minute detective thriller starring Rod LaRoque, Lamont Cranston is called to the home of a friend to expose a murderer.
Shadow.
In the 1938 sequel, International Crime, Cranston is a newspaper columnist who foils a global criminal syndicate.
The Shadow Speaks, bringing to you the latest news in the world of crime, prevention, and detection.
A Shadow movie serial premiered in 1940, directed by James W. Horn, with Vita Ann Borg as Margot Lane and Alaskan-born Victor Jory as the Shadow.
This is the Shadow. Stand away from that prisoner.
A radio episode and 2 pulp tales were combined to create the story for this 15-chapter movie serial from Columbia, where the Shadow battles not the lone tiger, but the black tiger. Yet another supercriminal who attempts to, what else? Conquer the world until he meets the Shadow. Then he's gone with the wind. Before being cast as the Shadow, Victor Jory had usually played villains, including a former slave overseer in Gone with the Wind who wants to buy Tara, Scarred O'Hara's plantation, from her.
Come out here to offer to buy the place from you, to make your right good offer.
That's all of Tara you'll ever get.
You'll be sorry for that.
Scarlet better look out. By the way, did you know that TV Superman George Reeves also appears in the very beginning of Gone with the Wind?
I've got an idea. We'll talk about the barbecue the Wilkses are giving over 12 Oaks tomorrow.
The Man of Steel was a bit of a magician himself. Another superhero actor appears in Gone with the Wind. Do you know which one?
Are you ready to tell me?
Yeah. I'll not only tell you how, I'll show you how it's done. Shazam!
It's Tom Tyler, who once played Captain Marvel. Here he is in Gone with the Wind.
Come on, man, we've got to march.
As Captain Marvel, Tyler used the powers of Shazam to take the sting out of a pulp-inspired super criminal named the Scorpion, who could have come right out of the pages of The Shadow. Their battle, sponsored by Republic Pictures, lasted for 12 startling, amazing, never-to-be-forgotten episodes. And in the end...
Justice will be done to him. He committed many crimes in his own country.
Curses! Foiled again.
Next came The Shadow Returns. Behind the Mask.
We'll turn off the lights.
I did, May. I like the dark.
And The Missing Lady, starring Kane Richmond. This unaired pilot, starring Tom Helmore, attempted to bring The Shadow to television in 1954.
The Shadow?
Who are you? I am the Shadow. Who knows what evil lurks in the hearts of men?
Only the Shadow knows.
1958's Invisible Avenger, also known as Bourbon Street Shadows, starred Richard Durr as the Shadow foiling a plot to overthrow a foreign government. In addition to the pulp magazine, Street and Smith also published a Shadow comic book that ran for 101 issues. The first 5 issues featured fully painted covers, all recycled from the pulps. The comic sometimes adapted episodes of the radio drama, including a popular show called Spider Boy, about a crazed weaver who was obsessed with spiders.
We present one of your favorite stories by popular demand, the weird and wild tale of Spider Boy.
The Shadow never had his own pet spider, but once he almost got his own version of Superboy's dog, Krypto, the famous super dog from Krypton. Vulcan, the Great Dane of Crime at Seven Oaks, had become popular among Shadow readers. John Nanovic, the man who edited the Shadow pulp magazine from 1931 all the way through 1943, wanted to add Vulcan the dog to the Shadow family permanently, but cover artist Graves Gladney refused to return to the gas station where the vicious-looking dog he had used as a model for Vulcan lived. So, thankfully, the Master of Darkness never got his own version of Ace the Bat Hound. Although he did inspire Sonic's nemesis, Shadow the Hedgehog, and Disney's Mallard of Darkness, Darkwing Duck. Plus this episode of Pinky and the Brain.
The jig is up, crazed madman, for I am the Mist.
Mist! Save me! Save me!
By altering the frequencies of my voice, I am able to befog men's minds.
But how?
With these, in a moment, you will no longer be able to see me, for I am the fog.
And so ends another episode of The Mist, brought to you by Blue Coal.
DC Comics decided to revive The Shadow in the 1970s. The book was originally to be done by Len Wein and Jim Steranko, but the deal fell through when Steranko demanded that his original artwork be returned to him, and then insisted on writing his own stories. Anticipating a problematic relationship with Steranko, DC decided instead to give the scripting job to Batman writer Denny O'Neil and assign the artistic chores to Alex Toth, until Toth had a Hollywood screenwriter punch up O'Neill's story and ask DC to pay for the rewrite. DC felt that it wasn't Toth's place to take it upon himself to rewrite the title's premier story without being asked, so they took him off the book. Next came Bernie Wrightson. With the script for the first DC Shadow issue completed, teaser ads such as this one, drawn by Wrightson, began running. But then Wrightson had to leave the book to keep up with his work on Swamp Thing and other titles. DC wanted to replace him with Jim Aparo, but Aparo wasn't available at the time, so he too faded out of the picture. Newcomer Michael Kaluta had just begun working for DC with his Carson of Venus backup series in Weird Worlds. Kaluta was visiting the DC office in Manhattan when he asked for and got the job. Surprisingly, Kaluta knew nothing about the Shadow. Returning to the source material, he decided Ed Cartier had best captured the essence of the character. Employing Cartier's work as a starting point, Kaluta placed the Shadow in a world saturated with period detail and alive with atmosphere. DC's first Shadow comic book featured an original story by O'Neil. Next came The Freak Show Murders, adapted from the 1944 pulp story of the same name by Walter Gibson, who had once traveled with a carnival. Shadow number 3, Kingdom of the Cobra, was adapted from a radio episode. Years after he first worked on the character, Mike Kaluta did a new 15-page Shadow story titled In the Toils of Wingfat for a hardcover collection entitled From the Private Files of the Shadow. Walter Gibson thought Batman was just a clowned-up version of the Shadow, and when the two nocturnal crime busters finally met each other, Batman actually admitted to the Shadow that he was one of his main inspirations. Ironically, Walter Gibson's last published work appeared in this 1981 issue of Detective Comics. DC did several other series starring the Shadow, including a memorable run by Gerard Jones and Ed Barretto on The Shadow Strikes, which revolved largely around the Shadow's mysterious past and his ongoing war with Shiwan Khan. The Shadow had previously met the Rocket Man movie serial-inspired Rocketeer while posing as Lamont Cranston, although Rocketeer creator Dave Stevens couldn't identify the Master of Darkness by name for legal reasons. In The Shadow Strikes, the Shadow finally met his pulp brother, Street and Smith's other superstar, the one and only Doc Savage. The colorist for The Shadow Strikes was Shadow Uber-fan Anthony Tollin. Tollin and his friend Walter Gibson co-authored The Shadow Scrapbook. And Tollin is currently publishing a monthly series of trade paperbacks reprinting classic Shadow and Doc Savage pulp stories. Marvel Comics took a ride on the Shadow comic merry-go-round with a 1988 hardcover graphic novel written by Denny O'Neil, penciled by Kaluta, and inked by DC war comic veteran Russ Heath. Finally, Dark Horse Comics published several Shadow miniseries by Kaluta and Gary Gianni, as well as an adaptation of the 1994 Shadow movie. Don't miss our next thrilling chapter, The Shadow Movie.
The Shadow knows.
Encouraged by the runaway success of the Superman and Batman movies, Universal decided to try their luck with a big-budget, star-studded Shadow feature film in 1994.
I've been looking for an original sin, one with a twist and a bit of a spin.
Neil Adams drew this unused logo for the movie. With a plot adapted mostly from Gibson's Shiwan Khan stories, The Shadow starred Alec Baldwin as Lamont Cranston and the Shadow, Penelope Ann Miller as Margot Lane, John Lone as
Shiwan Khan, last descendant of Genghis Khan.
David Koepp said he was always struck by the slogan, "Who knows what evil lurks in the hearts of men?" And he decided that the Shadow was so familiar with evil because of the evil filling his own heart.
Who knows what evil lurks in the hearts of men? It really means the Shadow knows these things because he's been there. You know, he lived this dark life himself.
Koepp's screenplay is about the Shadow's battle to overcome his own dark side. It's a story of atonement, with the Shadow struggling to atone for his sins by defeating the nefarious Shiwan Khan, the symbolic embodiment of the Shadow's evil past.
I'll hit this mark now. Find that light.
The film was directed by former video director Russell McKay. The studio had high hopes for a new zillion-dollar multi-film franchise, and there was a massive hype campaign leading up to the film's premiere.
Knows what evil lurks in the hearts of men? The Shadow knows. Armed with quick-draw 45s, the mysterious crime fighter faces the evil Shiwan Khan. But Shadow's hypno-eyes cloud men's minds. Who knows? The Shadow knows.
I sense somebody's coming.
Unfortunately, the movie also fell flat. But although it was not successful financially, it did feature a mostly faithful version of the Shadow, with many of the film's images directly inspired by Shadow pulps and comics. There's some interesting trivia, too. Let's go through the whole movie, shall we? The film's bridge scene recalls Harry Vincent's night-shrouded first encounter with the living Shadow. In the movie's music video, Original Sin, sung by Taylor Dane, a CGI cape that's not in the movie version of this scene has been added to the Shadow. Here's the Shadow in his secret sanctum, from a scene that didn't make the final cut. In a sequence recalling the DC comic by O'Neill and Kaluta, the Shadow changes identities in the back of Shreve's taxicab. The Shadow's high-altitude struggle with Khan's minions is inspired by two old pulp covers. There's a billboard in Times Square advertising Baldwin pianos. presumably the favorite piano of Shadow star Alec Baldwin. And in a joke on the old Camel cigarette slogan, "I'd walk a mile for a camel," there's another billboard that says, "I'd climb a mountain for a llama." Llamas are found in Tibet, where the Shadow is said to have acquired his power to cloud men's minds. The original storyboard for this scene shows this joke was a later addition. The purba, the mystic knife that gives the Shadow such a hard time in this movie, is actually a real Tibetan ritual instrument used to subjugate demons. The big mystery is why it almost gets as much screen time as the Shadow. Here's the Master of Darkness emerging from his own shadow. And the original storyboard images of the scene. Shadow's mirrored showdown with Shiwan Khan recalls both this pulp cover for Room of Doom and the classic Orson Welles film Lady from Shanghai. 2 days before this scene was scheduled to shoot, a huge earthquake struck Los Angeles and shattered the set, destroying most of the mirrors. There was no time or money to rebuild, so producers were forced to shoot the film's big climactic scene without the showpiece Mirrors of the Mind set. Talk about 7 years bad luck. This storyboard from the film shows the scope of this scene as it was originally intended. When Lamont and Margot kiss at the end of the movie, you can see a truck in the background with the last name of the film's director, Russell McKahey. And here's Margot with her very own gyrosol ring from a scene cut out of the movie's ending. And here's the film's final scene, showing the Shadow's face dissolving into a sleek metallic version of George Rosen's iconic Black Hush cover image. And on the CD soundtracked image, only one eye is artwork, and one eye is real. The Shadow will return to the silver screen soon, thanks to Shadow fans Sam Raimi and Michael Uslan. Raimi directed Darkman and the Spider-Man film series, and Uslan scripted an issue of DC's first Shadow series. The team is currently supervising production of a brand new Shadow movie. Does the Shadow know about this?
The Shadow knows.
Coming up next, don't move, don't breathe, don't stop now. It's time for the mind-blowing final chapter. Shock follows shock as the Shadow unmasks.
I am the Shadow.
Although the Shadow himself may know, the Shadow is not easy to get to know. At first, what little we know of the Shadow comes indirectly. Agents speculate. Gangsters mouth rumors. Every once in a while, Gibson drops enticing hints. But the Shadow never appears before the reader undisguised. He lurks in the background like the sinister villain of a movie serial. He has a love of obfuscation and dim lighting, and comes across as the kind of man who would wear a mask even when he's alone in a pitch-black room. Who was he? Who was he?
Who are you? Lamont Cranston.
But of course, Lamont Cranston wasn't the Shadow's only secret identity. He adopted a number of personas during his crime-crushing career, including a man named Henry Arnault, and even a janitor named Fritz. But on August 1, 1937, the Shadow finally revealed his true identity in the instant classic, The Shadow Unmasks. It seems the Shadow was formerly a renowned fighter pilot in the First World War. His real name is Kent Allard. According to Rick Lie's Chronology of Shadows, Allard was born in 1892. Gibson based the Kent Allard character on real-life English explorer Percy Fawcett. Fawcett entered the British Army at 19, rose to become a lieutenant colonel, and served in Ceylon, Hong Kong, and Brazil. He explored the forests and rivers of Brazil for 10 years, searching for traces of ancient civilization. Then, convinced he knew how to locate one, he set out to find it in 1925. He disappeared near the Jingzhou River and was never heard from again. Inspired by Fawcett's story, here's the secret origin of the living shadow as revealed by the Master of Darkness himself in his own words.
I was a World War I ace. Winning air battles seemed to come to me naturally, and I gained a preference for night flights. The enemy called me the Dark Eagle. They were glad when they shot down my plane, but I was not shot down. I landed by design and drilled the gas tank of my own ship. Wearing black garb, I traveled by night, on foot, within the enemy lines. I entered prison camps, yes, but never as a prisoner. I visited them only to release men who were held there, to guide them in their escape. By day, I adopted disguises, and working entirely on my own, I contacted our secret agents. That was when I learned my faculty for penetrating the deepest schemes. I became a roving secret agent, and finally located a secret airbase maintained by the enemy. It seemed suicidal to visit the place and map it. They actually trapped me after I had finished, but my experience as an aviator served me. I escaped from the base itself in one of the enemy's own planes. The war ended. I found that aviation offered part of the life I needed, but it provided neither the action of battle nor the keen work of the secret agent. I rejected the idea of becoming a soldier of fortune. I considered warfare an uncivilized institution, except when absolute necessity required it. I saw such necessity in the field that others had neglected. Crime was becoming rampant in America and elsewhere. Underworlds were organized with their own hidden battle lines. Only a lone foe could pierce that cordon. Once inside, he would have to move by stealth and strike with power and suddenness. I chose that mission. I resolved to bury my identity. I flew south and landed in Guatemala. I spent a few months among the Zinkas and gained their friendship. I came home disguised, so no one could recognize me. I became the Shadow.
But had the Shadow really unmasked? In a later story, Gibson wrote that Kent Allard was just another identity the Shadow used, leaving the real truth of the Shadow's identity forever lost in the darkness, as perhaps it should be. But the story doesn't end there. Several of Gibson's pulps hint that somewhere along the way, Kent Allard's face was hideously mutilated. His appearance is often described as mask-like, for good reason. In order to create the many different faces he employs, the Shadow apparently wears some sort of wireframe contraption that he uses as a base upon which he builds various disguises. Gibson once said that if he just took the thing away, he would look weird, almost skeletal. In The Red Blot, Gibson offers a description of what he called the horror face. A light appeared in the corner of the room. It revealed a small table upon which rested various articles of makeup. The Shadow seated himself before the table, but only his white hands appeared within the sphere of light. The hands appeared with what seemed to be a thin mat of wire gauze, no more than a skeleton framework filled with a few solid patches. The object disappeared as it was raised into the dark. Into the range of light came a head and a strange, weird reflection from the mirror. It was the image of a man who seemed to have no face, guised with the colorless surface of the thin mask. Only the shadow's eyes were visible as they glowed through a plastic mass of grayish blur. The hands came into action. The long fingers moved here and there about the table, finding objects that they needed. Upon the artificial base, the semblance of a human countenance was forming. Gibson never described the horror face in much detail because he didn't like to get too much on the gruesome side, as he put it. But the Shadow's actual undisguised face was exposed in The Shadow's Shadow. International criminal mastermind Felix Zubian schemes to uncover the Shadow's real identity. And in the final chapter, the Shadow confronts him face to face. Zubian shoots the Shadow. And here's what happens next. Zubian's snarl became a cry of triumph as he saw the Shadow roll upon the floor. The slouch hat was carried away by the bullet. The head of the Shadow lay obscured beneath the folds of his cloak. In that wild moment, Zubian thought he had slain his enemy. He did not realize that the Shadow's plunge had allowed him to escape the shot, that the black hat alone had received the bullet. Zubian was aiming to fire further shots to make sure of the Shadow's death, but he never accomplished that final purpose. An arm swept upward from the floor. Behind it came those glowing eyes, but it was not the eyes that stopped Felix Zubian. He was staring into the face of the Shadow, not the disguised features of Lamont Cranston or Henry Arnault, but the visage of the Shadow himself. What Zubian saw there, what expression on the Shadow's countenance made even that fiendish villain gasp in horror, no one will ever know. For Felix Zubian knew his last moment of life in that fateful instant. The last shot that was fired on that night came from the Shadow's automatic. Like a flash of light illuminating a terrifying silhouette, the Shadow's entire persona is explained in the brilliance of the horror face, his extraordinary skill at disguise, his constant use of makeup and other people's identities, his obsession with secrecy, his shunning of all human intimacy, his incredible remoteness from society. We mentioned earlier that the Shadow is like a personification of the id. Now we can go much further. Why did heroic Kent Allard choose to dress himself in villain's clothing? Allard has no feelings of guilt over the unsavory things he did in the service of his country. But just as scars cover his face, another scar, the scar of shame, lurks within his heart, like a dark shadow doomed to continually cast judgment upon itself. This is why Kent Allard adopted the aspect of a villain as the core of his own identity. It represents Allard's judgment upon himself. The Shadow can never escape his own dark past, and since he cannot enact the punishment due a villain upon himself, he continually seeks to enact it against others who reflect his dark past. The supercriminals, his only course is to destroy them over and over again, even at the fearful cost of transforming himself from a man into a living shadow.
Moving in for the kill, and they'll be held to pay someday. Put it all on the bill, 'cause we'll always be paying and paying until we're beyond expiration with a license to thrill.
Gibson said that in magic there's the effect and the method. In effect, the Shadow was the personification of a public wish to crush organized crime without mercy, while in method, the Shadow was a hero in villain's clothing, whose scarred existence reflected the national scars of crime, depression, and war. For a nation in desperate need of reassurance that such scars could be healed, the prestidigitation of pain into protection was the greatest magic trick ever performed by the man behind the Shadow. The one and only, the legendary Walter B. Gibson.
That was Winston Churchill. I've also intercepted several military dispatches and a radio program, something called The Shadow.
George Rosen returned for the last few Shadow pulp covers, including The Black Circle and Shadow number 325, The Whispering Eyes, which closed out the magazine's glorious 18-year run in 1949. The pulp's history was chronicled in the Duende History of the Shadow magazine by Will Murray, and in Gangland's Doom by Frank Eisenreber Jr. After 20 seasons, the last Shadow radio drama, Murder by the Sea, starring Brett Morrison as the Shadow, was broadcast in December 1954. The show had been revived numerous times since then, and Anthony Tollin has recreated several episodes with original Shadow radio cast members.
The character named by Harry Charlot, created and developed by Walter Gibson, has proven to be the rarest of fictional creations, an enduring legend.
The Shadow and his peerless peers are honored every year at Chicago's Windy City Pulp Conventions.
Chicago? That toddling town, home of the stockyards, Mrs. O'Leary's cow, the White Sox, the Cubs, Carl Sandburg.
Where fans can find back issues, meet creators, and celebrate their favorite pulp heroes.
Hello, this is Cranston Lamont of the Chicago Tribune.
Shadow fans, we've reached the end. Of the 325 Shadow novels published, Doc Savage author Lester Dent wrote one, this one, which was later revised by Gibson. Bruce Elliott wrote 15, Theodore Tinsley wrote 27, and Walter Gibson wrote all the rest, 283 Shadow novels, 85% of the entire series, a staggering total of some 15 million words.
As Bess Houdini once said, every magician knows where the trap door lies. The magic was in this man's personality.
15 million words. That's more than any other author in history has ever written about a single subject, all published under the pen name Maxwell Grant. Until 1963, when The Shadow finally unmasked, this time for real, as The Shadow was revived in several series of paperbacks, beginning with The Shadow Returns, the first Shadow cover ever to feature the byline of the man who casts the Shadow, Walter B. Gibson.
Who knows what evil lurks in the hearts of men?
I alone know, for I am the Shadow. Watch for me. You shall see me soon again.